Elk Ridge, Colorado, autumn of 1873. Three men, 4 years hiding on a mountain. One letter that none of them wrote. And the girl holding a brass instrument no one could name climbing down from a moy at the end of a trail that was never supposed to lead anyone here. But we will get to her. First, the mountain. Elk Ridge sat 9,000 feet above the world, a place where the tree line began to thin and the sky pressed close enough to touch. The air tasted of pine resin and cold stone. In the morning, fog rolled up from the valley below like a slow white tide, filling the spaces between the spruce trees until the whole mountain seemed to float above the earth. By afternoon, the wind burned away, and what remained was a silence so vast it had weight. Three men lived in that silence. Their cabin was hand-built from Douglas fir, no paint, no decoration. One large room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, three bunk beds bolted to the wall like berths on a ship. Outside the front door, three pairs of boots stood in a perfect line, toes pointing outward, heels touching the wall. It was a small thing, the kind of thing you would only notice if you had spent time around soldiers. These boots were arranged by habit, not by thought. The habit of men who had once answered to bugles and roll calls, and the weight of government issued wool on their shoulders. The cabin had a porch with 2 steps. On those steps, every morning for 4 years, Bridger Yates sat and cleaned his rifle. He was doing it now. The October sun slanted through the pines and caught the oil on the barrel, making it gleam like dark water. Bridger worked the cloth in long, even strokes. His hands were large, scarred across the knuckles, the skin of a man who had built everything he owned and repaired everything that broke. He was 34 years old, tall enough to fill a door frame, broad enough to block it. His hair was dark brown, cut short and practical with early silver at the temples that made him look older. His eyes were the color of amber of whiskey held up to firelight, and they rarely blinked. Behind the cabin, Nolan Yates was splitting wood. Each swing of the axe was harder than necessary. That was Nolan. He was 34 years younger than Bridger, built leaner and quicker, the body of a hunter rather than a soldier. His hair was a reddish brown that caught the autumn light like copper wire tied back behind his neck. He moved constantly. Even when he stood still, something in him vibrated, coiled, waiting. There was a rope burn scar on his left forearm and a knife permanently fixed to his belt. Nolan Yates never sat down without knowing where the nearest weapon was. He never entered a room without counting the exits. Inside the cabin, Thatcher Graves was reading. He sat by the window where the light was best, holding a book he had read perhaps 40 times. He was the youngest of the three, at 26, the shortest at 6'1", and the thinnest by a considerable margin. His hair was dark blonde, the same shade his brother Josiah once had, though he tried not to think about that. His eyes were brown and deep-set, the eyes of someone who watched more than he spoke. There were ink stains on his fingers. Always ink stains. Thatcher Graves read books, set traps for beaver and marten, and kept his thoughts folded tight inside his chest, like letters he could not bring himself to mail. These three men had lived on Elk Ridge for 4 years, and every morning looked exactly the same. Bridger cleaned his rifle. Nolan split wood. Thatcher read. The sun rose. The fog burned off. The silence held. Until today. Bridger saw it first. His eyes were trained for movement. Before sound, before shape, before conscious thought, his body registered the disturbance at the far end of the South Trail. Something was moving between the pines, slow swaying side to side with the rhythm of a 4-legged animal. A mule, and on the mule a figure, small, dusty, clinging to the saddle with a left hand that was white at the knuckles. The figure's right hand held something else, something that caught the sun and threw it back in a bright copper flash. It was not a gun. It was not a knife. It had glass and metal and calibrated markings and a mechanical precision that belonged to a different world entirely. A world of universities and observatories and gaslit parlors. Not this world of pine trees and rifle oil and men who had stopped counting the days. The mule reached the clearing in front of the cabin and stopped. The figure swung down, not gracefully but steadily. She planted both feet on the ground with the sureness of someone who had been traveling too long to waste energy on stumbling. She was young, early 20s, dark brown hair that had come loose from whatever arrangement it had been in 2 weeks ago. Dust covering a practical gray traveling coat, no ribbons, no lace. Her hands were small and pale with ink stains on the fingertips. She reached into her coat and pulled out a letter. White paper folded into quarters. She held it out to Bridger. Bridger took the letter, read it. His jaw tightened. His hand, the one holding the paper, did not tremble, but it went rigid, the tendons standing out like cords. The letter bore the name of a man who did not exist, but the address was this cabin. Bridger called the other two. Nolan came around the corner with the axe still in his hand. Thatcher came out the door with his finger still marking his page. Three men looked at the letter, then they looked at each other. None of them had written it, but someone knew exactly where they lived. Someone knew exactly what they were hiding. And someone had sent this girl to them. Nolan moved first. He stepped forward, one hand dropping to the pistol on his hip, his blue-gray eyes sweeping the trail behind the girl, checking for others following. His voice came out like a slap. "Who sent you? Who do you work for?" Bridger did not speak yet. He was looking at the girl. More specifically, he was looking at the brass instrument she held in her right hand. It had an eyepiece, a curved arc with degree markings, a set of mirrors, and a small telescope. He had never seen one before, but his instincts classified it automatically. Unknown object, unknown purpose, possible. Threat. Is that a weapon? The girl looked at the brass instrument, then at Bridger. Something flickered in her brown eyes. Not fear. Something closer to exhaustion mixed with disbelief, the expression of someone who had traveled 14 days to reach a place that was already going wrong. "It is a sextant," she said. "It measures the angle between a star and the horizon. It tells me where I am on the earth." She paused. "It has never killed anyone." And that was how Wren Calloway arrived at Elk Ridge. She did not cry. She did not beg. She stood in the clearing with a trail dust in her hair and $4 in her pocket and the single most valuable thing she owned hanging from her right hand, and she spoke clearly. "I answered an advertisement in the Philadelphia Inquirer. The advertisement said, 'Seeking a companion who understands that the sky does not end at the horizon.' I have been traveling for 2 weeks, through Omaha, through Denver, through 3 stagecoach stations, and 2 nights sleeping outdoors. If this is a joke, please tell me now. I still have enough money to go back." She was not asking to stay. She was demanding the truth. There was a difference, and all 3 men recognized it. Bridger folded the letter and put it in his shirt pocket. He looked at Nolan. A slight shake of the head. "Do not act yet." He looked at Thatcher. Thatcher said nothing. His face had gone the color of old flour. His hand, the one holding the book, had closed so tight the knuckles were white. But no one was looking at Thatcher. Bridger made his decision in 3 seconds. "You will sleep in the grain shed tonight. In the morning we will figure out what is happening." He turned back to his rifle. Conversation over. And Thatcher Graves, standing in the doorway, did not look surprised. But no one noticed that either. The grain shed was cold and dark and smelled of dried grass and old wood. Moonlight came through the gaps between the planks in thin white lines, like bars on a window. Something small scurried in the corner. A mouse, maybe, or a rat. Wren set her bag on the ground and unpacked by feel. One change of clothes, practical not pretty, a wooden ruler, a pencil, 4 silver dollars. Her father's astronomical notebook, leather-bound, dog-eared, filled with numbers and star charts drawn in blue ink. And the sextant brass tarnished to the color of dark honey with the initials EC engraved on the side. Edmund Calloway. Her father's instrument, her father's life, now her inheritance. She opened the notebook to a page she had visited 1,000 times. The handwriting was steady, precise, the work of hands that had not yet begun to shake. Her father had written this before the illness, before the forgetting, before he started calling her by her mother's name. "Find your position first. Then you will know which way to go." Wren touched the letters with her fingertip. The ink was slightly raised, the way it gets when you press hard with a steel nib. Her father always pressed hard. He was a man who committed fully to every stroke. He did not remember writing these words. He did not remember his daughter's name. He sat by the window in Philadelphia, now looked at the sky, and could not name a single star. And Wren Calloway, who could name every star visible from the northern hemisphere, was sitting alone in a grain shed on a mountain in Colorado, 9,000 feet above sea level, 1,000 miles from anyone who knew her, with $4 and a brass instrument and a letter written by someone who did not exist. She did not cry. She folded the thin blanket that had been left in the shed into a pillow. She knotted a rope to a wooden post and hung the sextant above the ground to keep it dry. She arranged her things in a neat row. Notebook next to pencil, ruler next to compass, order from chaos, control over the things she could control. 20 minutes later, the shed door creaked. A heavy blanket was pushed through the gap at the bottom. Thick wool, warm smelling of homemade lye soap. No knock, no voice. Footsteps retreating across dry leaves, heavy the footsteps of a large man trying and failing to walk quietly. Wren looked at the blanket. She did not say thank you. There was no one to hear it. She pulled the blanket over herself and closed her eyes. In the cabin, the fire cracked and popped. 3 men sat around it, and the air between them was tight as a drum skin. Nolan paced. He always paced when he was angry, and he was angry most of the time. Someone knows where we are. Someone sent her. This is a trap. Bridger sat in his chair, elbows on knees, staring at the fire. If it were a trap, they would not send a girl 5'3" with a brass compass. They would send guns. Then what is she doing here? That is what we are going to find out in the morning. Nolan turned to Thatcher, who sat in the far corner of the table staring at the flames. What do you think? Thatcher looked up. For a moment, something crossed his face. Guilt, maybe, or fear. Then he spoke, and his voice was quiet but unusually direct. I think she traveled 2 weeks alone through Indian territory and bandit country without a weapon. Either she is out of her mind, or she is braver than anyone on this mountain. Silence. Bridger looked at Thatcher, a flicker of something new in the amber eyes. Surprise, Thatcher rarely spoke that plainly. Nolan snorted. Brave or crazy, still trouble. Bridger stood. He walked to his bunk and pulled off his blanket. The thick one, the warmest one. He carried it toward the door. Nolan watched. You are giving her your blanket. The shed is cold. He walked out. No further explanation. Nolan looked at Thatcher. Thatcher looked at the fire. Thatcher Graves did not sleep that night because he knew something the other two did not. The girl in the grain shed had not come because of an advertisement in a newspaper. She had come because of him. Morning, thin fog on Elk Ridge, the kind that burns off by 10. Wren came out of the shed at first light. Her hair was repinned, her coat brushed clean. She had been awake for an hour preparing. The 3 men sat on the porch eating breakfast. Hard bread, black coffee, smoked venison. They did not invite her to sit. 3 pairs of eyes tracked her waiting. Waiting for tears. Waiting for pleading. Waiting for the words, I want to go home. She gave them none of those things. Wren walked straight past the porch into the clearing in front of the cabin where the morning sun angled through the pines. She opened the sextant, raised it to her eye, adjusted the mirrors with practiced fingers sighting on a reference point where the sun's angle met the horizon. She read the number on the arc, wrote 2 figures in her notebook with a pencil. The 3 men stopped eating. Nolan spoke first, curiosity overriding anger. What are you doing? Wren closed the notebook, looked at the 3 men. Her voice was calm, measured, the voice of someone who had learned to speak about numbers the way other people speak about the weather. Determining latitude, 39 degrees, 47 minutes north. This cabin. Silence. The advertisement in the Enquirer listed the address as Elk Basin. I checked the coordinates before I left Philadelphia. Elk Basin sits at 39 degrees, 25 minutes north, 22 miles northwest of here. Longer silence. Whoever wrote that advertisement gave the wrong coordinates, or deliberately wrong. But whoever wrote it also knew I would notice the discrepancy because whoever wrote it knew I can read the stars. That person brought me here, not to Elk Basin. That person wanted me at this cabin. 3 men stared at the girl standing in the morning sun, holding a brass sextant, telling them things about their own home that they did not know. And the balance of power shifted. She was not a helpless bride. She was a scientist reading data. And she had just proven in 30 seconds in 2 numbers that someone had orchestrated her arrival with precision. Bridger Yates stood up. He walked to the fire, poured coffee into a tin cup, walked back and set the cup on the porch step near where Wren stood. He did not hand it to her. He set it down, a silent offering, an acknowledgement. Nolan's eyes went wide. He looked at Bridger. An unspoken message passed between brothers, the kind that needs no words after 30 years of shared blood. She can read coordinates. And Thatcher Graves set his coffee cup down on the railing because his hand was no longer steady. At that moment, a sound came from the north trail, a mule braying hooves on stone. An old man appeared in the clearing, leading a pack mule loaded with 2 wooden crates. Jasper Flint, 65 years old, silver beard hanging to his chest, back bent from decades underground in silver mines. He delivered smoked meat to the 3 men every month and had done so for 4 years without missing a delivery and without asking a single question he did not need answered. Jasper looked at Wren, looked at the 3 men, looked at Wren again. His eyes paused on the sextant. Old Jasper had been a miner long enough to recognize a surveying instrument when he saw one. "New company, got a sextant." His voice was flat, observation, not inquiry. Bridger said, "Misunderstanding, sorting it out." Jasper nodded, unloaded the meat, took his money, turned his mule. But before he left, he touched the brim of his hat toward Wren. One word, "Miss." Then he was gone down the trail. And Wren Calloway, without knowing it, had just been remembered by the one man on this mountain who would matter most at the end. After Jasper left, Wren stood on the porch and faced all 3. "I know 3 things. 1, someone wrote a fake advertisement to bring me here. 2, that person knows I measure stars with a sextant, which is not common knowledge. 3, that person wants me here for my skill, not for marriage." She paused. Her eyes moved across the 3 faces. "I sold my mother's ring to pay for the journey west, the only ring she ever owned. I deserve the truth." The sentence about the ring landed like a stone dropped into still water. She had sacrificed her last connection to her dead mother to come here. Nolan's jaw tightened. "You do not need to know." Bridger said nothing, but he looked at Thatcher, and the look was cold and purposeful. The look of a sergeant who suspects one of his men is hiding something. Thatcher stood up. He stepped to the center of the porch. For the first time, he did not sit in the corner. He did not hide behind his book. "My brother's name was Josiah Graves, 20 years old when he died, 4 years ago. Fort Kearney." He paused, breathed. Josiah was a scout in Bridger's unit. One night in March of 1869, he was assigned a secret reconnaissance mission. Handwritten orders from Colonel Whitaker signed and sealed. The mission patrolled Zone Y, the eastern border of Fort Kearney. 7 days later, Josiah was arrested. The official report stated he was found in Zone X, 14 miles west, deep in Indian territory outside all patrol boundaries. The charge: desertion in collaboration with hostile natives. Pause. The sentence was execution. Heavy silence, the kind that has texture. Josiah did not desert. He was following orders. We have a copy of the reconnaissance directive signed by Whitaker himself, but the directive only says patrol Zone Y. It does not give exact coordinates. The execution report, on the other hand, gives very exact coordinates. Coordinates that place Josiah in Zone X Indian Territory, 14 miles from where he was actually supposed to be. Thatcher looked at the sextant, still in Wren's hand. Someone changed the coordinates after Josiah was dead. Changed Zone Y to Zone X. Turned a mission into desertion. But to prove the coordinates were changed, you need someone who can measure the sky. Someone who can stand at the actual location, read the stars, and prove that the numbers in the report are wrong. He looked at Wren. "You can read the stars. You can prove which coordinates are true." The silence that followed was the longest of the morning. Wren understood. She had not been invited to be a wife. She had been invited to be a scientific witness. And somewhere in the telling, something changed in the air. Because now Nolan Yates was no longer angry. He was remembering. The memory came like it always came, uninvited, unannounced. A door opening in his mind that he could never keep shut. Fort Kearney, dawn, gray sky, 6 soldiers standing in a line, rifles shouldered. Josiah Graves standing before the post, 20 years old, blonde, hair like Thatcher's blue eyes, his hands tied behind his back with hemp rope. Nolan had been assigned to blindfold. He walked forward, each step heavier than the last. Josiah looked at him, not afraid, just sad, and whispered so quietly that only Nolan heard, "Tell Thatcher he never finished the last flower in the notebook." Nolan tied the blindfold, black cloth over blue eyes. 6 shots. Josiah fell. The ground at Fort Kearney soaked up the blood, and no one kept a record of it. And Nolan Yates, who would never sleep a full night again for as long as he lived, stood and watched until they buried him. The memory ended. Nolan sat on the porch step, hands clenched, white head bowed. Bridger placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. No words. Two brothers. 4 years of shared silence. Wren was quiet for a long time. She looked at her hands, at the sextant, at the mountains. Who wrote the letter? 3 sets of eyes. Thatcher swallowed. He was not ready. Not yet. We do not know, he said. A lie, the first of several, and the heaviest. Wren looked at Thatcher for one beat longer than necessary. Not suspicious exactly, more like reading. The way she read the sky, looking for the position of truth among what was visible. Then Thatcher went into the cabin and came back carrying a small notebook. Brown leather palm size filled with pencil drawings. He held it out. This was Josiah's. My brother was not a soldier. He was an artist in a uniform. He drew every wildflower he found on patrol because he believed if no one drew them, they would vanish and no one would know they had ever existed. Wren took the notebook, turned the pages slowly. Daisies, violets, clover, each flower drawn with care, labeled in Latin, dated the location noted. The hands of a 20-year-old boy who would die a few weeks later drawing flowers. Then she reached the last page and stopped. It was not a flower, it was a diagram, a rectangle, possibly a building or a storage shed with symbols inside that looked like rifles, arrows pointing to a road, and in the corner 2 letters MW. You know what this page is? Wren asked. Thatcher nodded slowly. Josiah drew it before he was captured. It is a diagram of a weapons cache, the place where Colonel Nate Whitaker stored military rifles and ammunition to sell to black market traders. MW. Marcus Whitaker. Josiah found the cache during his patrol. That is why Whitaker had to kill him. Wren stared at the diagram for a long time. This is not a drawing. This is the intention of a man who wanted to tell the truth but did not live long enough. She closed the notebook gently, looked up at the 3 men, and made her decision. I will stay, not because of the letter, because if a soldier was killed for something he did not do, a soldier who drew wildflowers, and I can prove it, then this is the reason my father taught me to read the stars. She paused. But I need 5 clear nights, 1 measurement per night, 5 different star positions to calculate exact coordinates. On this mountain in October, clear skies are not guaranteed. Fog, rain, early snow, any of these will cost me a night, and every lost night brings us closer to winter. 5 nights, a countdown had begun. The first clear night came 2 days later. At 9,000 feet above sea level, the sky over Elk Ridge was not simply dark. It was deep. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a river of crushed silver so dense and bright that it cast faint shadows on the rocks below. Stars did not twinkle at this altitude. They burned. Steady, unwavering, ancient. Wren sat on the flat boulder behind the cabin, the boulder that overlooked the valley and the endless dark ranks of spruce trees falling away below. The sextant was raised to her eye. Her notebook lay open on her knee. A pencil was clenched between her teeth. She found Polaris first, the North Star, the one fixed point in the entire rotating sky. She adjusted the sextant's index arm, moving the mirrors until the star's image sat precisely on the horizon line in the eyepiece. Read the angle, 39 degrees, 47 minutes. Latitude confirmed. She wrote the number. Then she turned west, searching for Arcturus, the brightest star in the constellation Boötes, an orange giant hanging low above the tree line. She measured its altitude, noted the exact time from her father's pocket watch, and began calculating. The pencil moved across paper numbers flowing like a private language between her and the universe. She was a small figure on a dark rock under an enormous sky, but her hands were steady, absolutely steady. She had grown up in darkness like this on the rooftop of her father's house in Philadelphia, measuring stars while the city slept below. The dark was not her enemy. The dark was her workplace. From the cabin window, Thatcher watched. He was not looking at the stars. He was looking at her. And for the first time in 4 years, he saw what he had spent all that time searching for, hands skilled enough to save Josiah. But he saw something else too, something he had not expected. The quiet courage of a woman sitting alone in the dark on a strange mountain, was surrounded by strangers and keeping her hands still. The first star point was complete. The second night, clouds covered Elk Ridge like a gray wool blanket pulled over the face of the sky. Wren sat on the boulder for 2 hours, sextant in her lap, waiting for a gap that never came. She went back inside and set the sextant on the table, said quietly, almost to herself, "Every night I lose is a night closer to November. After November, the fog settles every night." Bridger heard. He said nothing. But the next morning he was outside before dawn splitting wood. Not the usual amount, 3 times the usual amount. Enough for a month. He was preparing for her to stay longer than planned. He did not say the words. He split wood. The days that followed were a slow and careful unraveling of distance. Nolan taught Wren to shoot. She had never held a rifle. The Springfield was nearly as long as she was tall and kicked like a mule. She missed 12 times. 12 shots into the dirt, the trees, the sky, the general vicinity of everything except the wooden crate Nolan had set up as a target. Nolan stood with his arms crossed, his face as readable as a granite cliff. On the 13th shot, the crate exploded. Nolan gave a short, sharp nod. That was it. That was how Nolan said, "Well done." In return, Wren spread a military survey map on the table and showed Nolan the error in the execution report. She traced the numbers with her finger. The report gives coordinates for Zone X, but the bearing listed is 247 degrees southwest. If you calculate from Fort Kearny at 247 degrees, the line runs directly into the patrol zone, Zone Y, not into Indian territory. The person who wrote the report listed one set of coordinates, but a bearing that points to a completely different place. They forgot that mathematics does not lie. Nolan stared at the map. His hand curled into a fist so tight the knuckles went white. For the first time in 4 years, he did not just know his brother's comrade died wrongfully. He saw it, 14 miles on paper, in angles and numbers, proof made visible. He turned and walked into the forest alone. He did not come back for 2 hours. Wren found the wooden cross behind the cabin on her 4th day. 2 letters carved into weathered oak, J.G. Josiah Graves. No name, no date, nothing more. Grass had grown up around the base. Dead leaves covered the ground. She did not ask about it. She knelt, cleared the leaves, smoothed the dirt, and picked a small purple wildflower from the edge of the clearing. She placed it beside the cross. Bridger saw the flower from across the yard. He stood motionless for a long time, staring. He had lived beside that cross for 4 years. He had never placed a flower, not because he did not care, because he did not believe he deserved to. That evening, a lamp appeared on the windowsill of the grain shed, a kerosene lamp burning low and steady, casting a warm square of light onto the ground outside, so that Wren could see her way when she went out to measure stars. From that night on, the lamp never went dark before she finished. On the 5th day, Wren's step creaked on the grain shed's stairs, and she stopped. The step had been repaired. For it had leaned to the left, uneven, one nail loose. Now it was straight, level, solid. No one mentioned it. Bridger sat on the cabin porch 20 meters away, drinking coffee, not looking in her direction. That afternoon, Nolan was sharpening his knife on the porch when Wren sat down nearby. She asked, not looking at him directly, the way you ask a question when you are not sure it will be welcome. "Your brother, Bridger, is he always like this? So quiet?" Nolan stopped sharpening. He looked up. For the first time, he spoke to Wren not with anger and not with suspicion, but with something rawer, something close to love. "My brother does not waste words. Every word he says he means. Every bullet he fires he means. That is who he is." He paused. "He is not afraid of grizzly bears, not afraid of blizzards, not afraid of 4 armed men outside this cabin. He is afraid of one thing. He is afraid that if we take the evidence down the mountain, the system will crush us again. He watched the system kill Josiah. He does not trust it to save anyone. And I do not trust the system. I trust evidence. There is a difference." Thatcher and Wren sat on the porch one evening while the others were inside. Thatcher had given her Josiah's notebook again, and she was going through it more carefully, page by page, studying the flowers. "Josiah drew beautifully," she said. "My father drew too, star charts, before the illness. Your father, he is losing his memory, slowly. He does not recognize me anymore. He calls me by my mother's name." Her voice was even, too even, practiced. She had said this sentence so many times it had lost its sharp edges, worn smooth like a river stone. But Thatcher heard what was underneath. He heard the girl who had watched her father disappear one memory at a time. My father taught me to read the stars every clear night on the rooftop since I was 10 years old. She paused. Now he sits by the window and looks at the sky, but he cannot name a single star. Silence. Two people looking at each other across a space that was no longer the distance between strangers. They both knew loss. Wren's father taken by illness, Thatcher's brother taken by injustice. Both had lost someone and kept going because stopping was not an option they could afford. On the fifth evening, Wren pulled a chair to the dinner table and sat down. No one had invited her. Nolan pushed the plate of roasted venison toward her without a word. Thatcher poured her coffee, his hand only slightly unsteady. Bridger sat across from her and ate in silence. No one said stay, but the fourth chair was never put away after that night. Later, Jasper Flint stopped by again. He had brought extra salt. While the men unloaded, Wren asked to borrow a length of rope to repair her mule's saddle, which had torn on the trail. Jasper gave her the rope. Then he said with the casual precision of a man who states facts the way other people state opinions, "Your mule. She is a strong one. She knows the way down to Ridgeline better than any map. Mules remember trails, do not need a person to lead them." It was an offhand remark, the kind of thing an old miner says when he has lived with mules longer than with people. But Wren heard it, and somewhere deep in the part of her mind that calculated angles and plotted positions, a small gear began to turn. That night, for the first time, the four of them sat on the porch together after dinner. No one spoke. The sky above Elk Ridge was beginning to clear, thin clouds pulling apart like cotton, revealing patches of stars. Wren held the sextant in her lap, waiting. Watching the sky the way a hunter watches the tree line. Tomorrow night might be clear, or the night after. She needed 2 more measurements. 2 more clear skies. The countdown continued. 3 points taken, 2 remaining. And somewhere below the mountain on a south trail, still marked with the tracks of a mule, the world was getting closer. The third clear night came like a gift no one had asked for. All day, the wind had blown from the northwest, pushing the clouds south and east, scrubbing the sky clean, until by late afternoon the blue was so deep it looked almost purple at the edges. By sunset, the first stars appeared while the horizon was still glowing orange, which was how you knew it would be a good night. Stars that show up early are stars that intend to stay. Wren was on the boulder by 8 o'clock, sextant raised notebook open. The routine was familiar now. Find Polaris, measure the angle, write the number, turn west, find Arcturus, measure again, calculate. The pencil moving across paper, translating light into longitude, turning photons that had traveled millions of years into 2 numbers on a page. She was alone, or thought she was. Then she heard footsteps behind her, heavy, deliberate. Not trying to sneak, but not announcing themselves either. The footsteps of a man who was simply walking to a place he had decided to be. Bridger Yates sat down 10 paces behind her, rifle across his knees, eyes facing the dark tree line, not the sky. He did not speak, did not explain. He was there the way a wall is there or a mountain. Present, immovable. Watching the darkness so she could watch the stars. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who did not need to justify their presence to each other. She measured. He guarded. The wind moved through the pine trees with the sound of a slow, endless exhalation, and the creek in the valley below murmured to itself, and the stars burned overhead in their ancient positions, indifferent to the small human dramas being played out 9,000 feet below them. 5 minutes passed. 10. The sextant clicked softly as Wren adjusted the mirrors. Then she spoke without turning her head. "You can come closer. I will teach you to read the stars." Bridger did not move immediately. 4 years of distance, 4 years of keeping everyone at arm's length, of measuring safety in the space between himself and other people. Distance was habit. Distance was armor. Distance was how he controlled a world that had already proven it could not be controlled. He stood up, walked forward, sat down beside her, closer than he had sat to anyone in 4 years, but still with enough space between them that they could speak softly without leaning in. Wren held out the sextant. Bridger took it, his hands large and rough and scarred, wrapped around the brass body of the instrument. The sextant looked small in his grip, delicate, a thing made for precision rather than force. His hand trembled slightly, and it was not from cold. For the first time in 4 years, he was touching something that belonged to another person. Something that was not a weapon, not a tool of survival. Something intricate and beautiful and designed to help human beings find out where they were in the vastness of the world. Ren guided his hand, adjusting the angle. Her fingers touched his on the brass arc. Brief, functional. The contact lasted less than 2 seconds, but it was the first time they had touched, and neither of them pretended it had not happened. Look through the eyepiece, Ren said. Find the brightest star to the north. Polaris. Adjust the arm until the star sits exactly on the horizon line in the mirror. Bridger looked. Through the small telescope, he saw the sky inverted, compressed, a circle of darkness filled with points of light. He found Polaris, bright, steady, patient, the star that every navigator for 1,000 years had used to find their way home. He adjusted the arm. The star slid down the mirror, touched the horizon, stopped. Read the number, Ren said. 39 degrees, 47 minutes. That is where you are. That is your position on the earth. Find your position, Ren said softly. The words hung in the air between them, carrying two meanings at once. The first was technical, an instruction, a lesson in celestial navigation. The second was something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with stars and everything to do with the man sitting beside her who had spent 4 years hiding on a mountain because he was afraid that moving forward would mean losing everything again. Find your position, stop hiding, figure out where you stand. Bridger lowered the sextant. He looked at Ren. For the first time, he did not look at her as a problem to be solved, a threat to be assessed, a stranger to be managed. He looked at her the way you look at someone when you are beginning to understand that they see something in you that you have been trying not to see in yourself. 2 seconds. Then he stood, returned the sextant, and walked back to his position 10 paces away. Rifle across his knees, eyes on the dark. He did not say thank you. But from that night on, the kerosene lamp on the windowsill never went out before she finished measuring. And sometimes when the light caught his face from across the clearing, Ren thought she saw something in those amber eyes that had not been there before. Something that looked, if you did not examine it too closely, like the first faint light before dawn. 2 more star points completed. 3 out of 5 total. The countdown continued. The next morning changed everything. Nolan came back from hunting at a run. Not the easy lope of a man returning with game, the hard-driven sprint of a man who has seen something he did not want to see. He burst into the clearing, breathing hard, and said 4 sentences. There are tracks on the South Trail. 4 horses, military shoes, 2 days out. Military shoes, not the rough, uneven nails of ranch horses or pack animals. The precise factory-stamped shoes of horses maintained by Army farriers. Uniform, sharp, deep in the soft earth of the mountain trail. 4 horses moving in formation, heading uphill, heading here. Bridger said one word. Whitaker. It was the first time the name had been spoken aloud at Elk Ridge since the 3 men had arrived. Colonel Marcus Whitaker, the man who had signed Josiah Graves' death warrant with one hand and his reconnaissance orders with the other. The man who had sold military rifles to black market traders and killed the one soldier who had found out. 4 years ago, he had been a colonel. Now he was a retired security consultant for the Consolidated Silver Mining Company, rich, respected, untouchable. Until now. Because now a girl who could read stars was living on the mountain where his evidence was buried. The argument that followed was the first real crack in the brotherhood of 3 men who had held together for 4 years through silence and routine and the shared weight of what they knew. Nolan wanted to run, take the evidence and go, over the West Ridge down to Denver, find a lawyer, file charges. Bridger shut it down. She has only measured 3 points. The evidence is not complete. Without all 5 measurements, we have paperwork that any military court can dismiss. We need the math. We need the sky. So we wait until they get here. Wait until there are guns in our faces. I am thinking. Thatcher said nothing. His face was the color of old candle wax. He sat at the table staring at his hands. And this time something in his silence was different. It was not the silence of a man who had nothing to say. It was the silence of a man who was holding something back. Something that, if released, would detonate everything around him. Because Thatcher knew what the other 2 had not yet figured out. Whitaker was not coming because of the old evidence in the wooden chest. That evidence had sat untouched for 4 years. Whitaker was coming because of the girl, because someone somewhere had connected the newspaper advertisement to the mountain, and the advertisement had been written by Thatcher. He had led Whitaker straight to them, and he had done it with ink on paper the same way Whitaker had killed Josiah. Wren had been listening from the grain shed steps. She walked into the clearing into the middle of the argument, and her voice cut through the anger like a blade through rope. I need 2 more clear nights. Give me 2 nights and you will have evidence that no court can dismiss. Not paperwork, mathematics. And mathematics cannot be burned. Night 4. The sky was clear, but nobody slept. Nolan crouched at the south end of the clearing, rifle ready, eyes fixed on the trail where the hoof prints pointed uphill like accusations. Bridger took the north side, moving between the trees with the practiced silence of a man who had spent 6 years as an Army scout. The mountain was dark around them, alive with the small sounds of predators and prey, and somewhere below, 4 riders were making camp and sharpening their purpose. Wren measured. Her hands were steady, but not completely steady. For the first time since she had arrived, a faint tremor moved through her fingers as she adjusted the sextant. Not cold, something else. For the first time, the sky had a deadline. Thatcher came and stood beside her. Not sitting, standing, close enough that she could hear him breathing. He had been carrying something inside him for days, and it was getting too heavy to hold. I am sorry for bringing you here. Wren stopped measuring, lowered the sextant, looked at him. The moon was behind clouds and his face was all shadow and angles, but she could see his eyes. Brown, deep, guilty. She said it, not as a question, as a statement of fact that she had already calculated the way she calculated coordinates, by measuring what was visible and deducing what was hidden. You wrote the letter. Thatcher did not deny it. The words came out of him like water from a crack in a dam, slow at first, then faster. I read the article about your father in the Philadelphia Inquirer. Professor Calloway and his daughter, the only woman in Pennsylvania who can read a sextant. I knew you were the only person alive who could prove Josiah was innocent. He paused. I wrote the best letter I could. The line about the sky not ending at the horizon, I wrote it because I knew it would speak to you, because I needed you to believe that whoever wrote it understood you. Silence. The stars turned overhead. Every word in that letter was calculated. Every sentence was designed to make you trust a man who did not exist. His voice dropped. I needed your skill. I used your loneliness to get it. Wren looked at him for a long time. She did not explode. She did not cry. What happened on her face was worse than both. It was the slow, quiet collapse of something that had been holding her up since she left Philadelphia. She had read that letter 50 times on the journey west. She had imagined the man who wrote it. She had let herself believe just a little that somewhere on a mountain there was someone who saw the same sky she saw. Now she knew every warm word had been a tactic. Every beautiful sentence had been bait. The letter was beautiful, Wren said. Her voice was flat, controlled. The kind of control that costs everything. That is the problem. She turned back to the sextant, raised it to her eye, measured the next star point with hands that were now completely steady, because when the world takes something from you, sometimes the only response is to do your work with greater precision than before. The 4th star point was complete. The next morning, Wren did not speak to Thatcher. She did not yell. She did not confront. She simply moved through the cabin as if he were a piece of furniture, and her silence was heavier than any accusation. She found Bridger outside splitting wood. The axe fell, rose, fell. She waited until he stopped. Did you know Thatcher wrote the letter? Bridger planted the axe in the stump, looked at her. His amber eyes held hers without wavering. No. And Nolan, no. She believed him. Not because his words were convincing, because Bridger Yates's eyes did not know how to lie. They only knew how to be silent. When Nolan found out the explosion was immediate and physical, he grabbed Thatcher by the shirt and shoved him against the cabin wall. You brought her here without telling us you put an advertisement in a newspaper. Do you understand what you did? You drew a map for Whitaker. Thatcher did not fight back. He took every word, every shove, because every word was true. Bridger stepped between them. put one hand on each chest and pushed them apart. His voice was low, not angry, something worse than angry, disappointed. Enough, sit down. And then something shifted behind Bridger's eyes, something he had been refusing to see for 4 years. Thatcher had been wrong in his method, wrong to lie, wrong to manipulate. But Thatcher had been right in his purpose. He had done the one thing none of them had the courage to do. He had reached out to the world below the mountain and asked for help. And Bridger, the one who wanted to burn the evidence and live in peace, the one who called hiding protecting the family, Bridger was the one who had been most wrong of all. Wren stood in the middle of the cabin. She looked at the sextant lying on the table, catching the morning light through the window, the brass gleaming like a small sun. Find your position. She said it for the third time, and this time the words meant something new. Not a navigation instruction, not a lesson in stargazing. A question she was asking herself: where do I stand in this story? Am I a victim, a tool, or something else? I will finish the measurements tonight, not because of the letter, not because of Thatcher, because of Josiah, because the sky tells the truth and someone has to listen. Night 5, the last night of the countdown. Fog came early, thick and white, in absolute, rising from the valley like smoke from a fire that would never go out. By 7 in the evening, Elkridge had disappeared. The cabin, the trees, the sky, all of it swallowed by whiteness. Visibility dropped to 10 feet. The temperature dropped to near freezing. And somewhere below the fog line, 4 riders on military horses were one day closer. Wren sat on the boulder, sextant in her lap, blanket around her shoulders, waiting. 9 o'clock. Fog. She wrote in her study, but wind southeast 3 knots, no change. 10 o'clock. Fog thicker. She pulled the blanket tighter. 11 o'clock. Vipim. No stars. She could not see the trees 20 feet away. Midnight. Fog. Bridger came out from the cabin carrying a second blanket. He draped it over her shoulders without a word and went back inside. 1 in the morning, the fog began to thin. Or did it? Wren stared upward. A faint lighter patch appeared in the white, then closed. A tease. Not enough. She wrote, wind shifting, possible break. 2 in the morning. Thatcher brought hot coffee. Set it beside the boulder. Did not speak. Wren did not look at him, but she drank the coffee. Her hands wrapped around the tin cup were shaking from cold. 2:30. The fog was definitely thinner. Something was happening in the upper atmosphere. The wind was changing direction, swinging from southeast to northwest, and the new wind was drier, colder, the kind of wind that clears mountains. 3 in the morning. The wind shifted. It happened slowly at first, and then all at once, the way dawn happens if you are watching for it. The fog pulled apart like torn cotton. A patch of sky opened directly overhead, dark, deep, and filled with stars. Bridger was at her side in seconds. He had been watching from the cabin window, his hand on her shoulder shaking gently. Clear sky. Wren came awake instantly. She had dozed, the sextant clutched in her lap like a child holding a stuffed animal. Her body was stiff from cold, her fingers numb. But when she raised the sextant, when the brass touched her palms, the trembling stopped. Her hands became the steadiest things on the mountain. Bridger held the kerosene lamp low, angling the light onto her notebook so she could read her own numbers. Nolan appeared at the perimeter, rifle ready, eyes sweeping the dark trees. And Thatcher stood farther back at the edge of the light. He was the one who had noticed the wind changing. He was the one who had woken Bridger. The 3 men stood in a rough triangle around Wren as she took the final measurement. No one spoke. The only sounds were the click of the sextant, the scratch of the pencil, and the wind moving through the highest branches of the pines like a long-held breath finally released. The eastern sky began to lighten, pink, then gold, then the color of embers. Dawn was coming. Wren closed her notebook. Her hands were trembling now from cold and something else. She stood up, looked at the 3 men, and spoke in a voice that shook but did not break. The coordinates in the execution report are wrong by 14 miles to the west. Josiah Graves was not in Indian territory. He was exactly where the reconnaissance directive told him to be, in the patrol zone at coordinates that matched Zone Y on the original orders. She paused. I can prove this in any court. Any other surveyor who comes up here and takes the same measurements will get the same result, because the sky does not lie. The 5th star point was complete. The countdown was over, and the sun rose over Elk Ridge like a door opening onto something that had been locked for 4 years. But truth told to the sky means nothing if the ground is not ready to hear it. And Colonel Marcus Whitaker had ridden through the night. He arrived that afternoon. The sound of hooves came first steady and unhurried, the rhythm of horses being ridden by someone who was not searching but arriving. Someone who knew exactly where he was going. 4 riders appeared at the end of the South Trail. The man in front was tall and thin and sat his horse with the rigid posture of a career military officer, his spine a vertical line from saddle to hat brim. He wore an old army overcoat, not for warmth but for statement, a wide-brimmed felt hat, a silver mustache trimmed with surgical precision, gray eyes that moved slowly across the clearing, the cabin, the men, the girl cataloging everything, assessing, calculating. His left hand wore a black leather glove. Always the left hand, never the right. Colonel Marcus Whitaker dismounted. He removed his gloves one finger at a time, the way a man removes gloves when he wants you to watch him do it. He looked around the cabin clearing with the patient interest of a landlord visiting a property. Sergeant Yates, a slight nod toward Bridger. Private Yates, his gaze moved to Nolan. And Mr. Graves, the name dropped lower, quieter. Graves, the same surname as the boy he had ordered shot. Each name was a knife, and he placed them with precision. 4 years, I assume you had frozen to death up here? The thin line of his mouth curved, a smile that did not reach his eyes. I am glad to be wrong. 3 men stood on the porch and felt the temperature drop. Whitaker's gaze found Wren. His eyes paused, assessed, dismissed, reassessed. There was nothing casual about the process. He was reading her the way a general reads a battlefield. What are the positions? What are the threats? What can be used? And you must be Miss Calloway. Your brother is very worried about you. He reached into his coat and produced a folded document. He was worried enough to file a formal complaint with the authorities, claiming his sister was lured away by deserters. Dangerous men. He held up the paper. Wren recognized Gordon's handwriting. The same handwriting she had seen on birthday cards, on shopping lists, on the letter that told her Aldrich Poole had agreed to the marriage terms. Her brother's hand used as a weapon against her. I come with 3 things, Whitaker said, counting on his ungloved fingers. 1, arrest warrants for 3 military deserters. 2, a family complaint alleging kidnapping. 3, goodwill. The smile again. If Miss Calloway leaves with me voluntarily today, right now, no one gets arrested. No one gets hurt. We all go home. The 3 riders behind him had not dismounted. They sat their horses with the heavy stillness of men who were paid by the day and comfortable with violence. Pinkertons, or close enough. Hired hands with hard eyes and holstered revolvers. Whitaker did not need to say what everyone already understood. He did not want to arrest anyone. He did not care about desertion charges or Gordon Calloway's complaint. He wanted one thing, the girl. Without Wren, no one could decode the coordinates. Without Wren, the evidence went back to being paper in a wooden chest. She was the key, and he wanted to remove the key from the lock. The 3 men looked at Wren. Not one of them said stay, because saying stay would mean choosing for her, and none of them had that right. It was her decision, her risk, her life. Bridger spoke slowly, each word placed like a stone in a wall. Miss Calloway, you are free to go. No one here is holding you, and no one here would blame you. The silence that followed was the kind that changes lives. Wren looked at Whitaker, at the complaint letter in his hand, at the sextant on the table inside the cabin, visible through the open door. She looked at the 3 men who had not asked her to stay. She walked into the cabin, picked up the sextant, walked back out, stood beside Bridger. I was not kidnapped. I was not lured. I came here of my own choice, and I will leave when I decide to leave. She paused and looked directly into Whitaker's gray eyes. Today is not that day. Whitaker's smile disappeared. Not all at once. Slowly, the way wax melts, revealing something harder underneath. His eyes went cold, truly cold. The temperature of a man who has killed before and keeps the memory filed under necessary. Unfortunate. He said it quietly. One word. Then he turned to his lead rider. Set up camp at the creek below. We have warrants. No rush. He mounted his horse, replaced his gloves one finger at a time, and rode back down the trail without looking back. The siege lasted 3 days. On the first day, Whitaker's men cut the three main routes off the mountain. The south trail, the obvious way down. The west path through the forest where the game trails ran. The north route along the creek bed. Each position was manned by one rider rotating in shifts with clear sight lines and a rifle. Professional, methodical, the work of men who had done this before. That left only the east side. And the east side was a near vertical rock face dropping 500 feet into a ravine thick with old-growth pine. No trail, no path, no way down for a person on foot, but maybe not impossible for a mule. Whitaker sent his message on the first evening, not delivered by hand, delivered by arrow, a hunting arrow shot from 200 yards with dead center accuracy embedded in the wooden post 3 feet from the cabin door. The note tied to the shaft read, 3 days, deliver the girl and the papers. On the 4th day I come up. 200 yards. Dead center. The accuracy was the message. Nolan wanted to fight. 3 against 4. We have the high ground. It is possible. Bridger shook his head. And then what kill a retired colonel we hang? All 3 of us. And the evidence dies with us. Thatcher proposed sending the evidence to Deputy Marshal Orrin Beck in Ridgeline. But who would go? Every path was watched. On the second day, Nolan tried. He went at 3 in the morning, slipping through the forest to the west on hands and knees, moving between the trees with the skill of a man who had spent 4 years hunting these woods. He knew every root, every stone, every low branch. He was 50 yards from the tree line when the rifle shot split the darkness. The bullet creased his left shoulder, tearing his shirt and leaving a red line that bled freely but was not deep. A warning shot, placed exactly where they wanted it. He crawled back, sat on the cabin floor, pressing a cloth to his shoulder, his face tight with rage. They have the west covered too, all 4 directions. He looked at Thatcher. You did this. Your advertisement led him here. Thatcher did not defend himself. Nolan stood. I should break your jaw before Whitaker breaks all of ours. Bridger stepped between them again. I said enough. Then on the second afternoon, Whitaker escalated. A fire arrow. It came from the south tree line, a long, arcing shot trailing smoke against the gray sky, and it struck the roof of the grain shed. The dry cedar shingles caught immediately. Flames spread across the roof in seconds, orange tongues licking upward, sending a column of black smoke straight into the windless air. Nolan ran for the shed. A second rifle shot hit the ground 1 pace in front of his boots, kicking up dirt. He froze. The message was unmistakable. Stay back. The grain shed burned. It took 20 minutes. When it was done, there was nothing left but a rectangle of charred posts and ash. Wren's spare clothes, her thin blanket, the rope she had used to hang the sextant, all gone. But the sextant was safe. The notebook was safe. Because Bridger, 2 days earlier, on the day Whitaker first arrived, had told Wren to move everything important into the cabin. Instinct. The instinct of a man who had survived because he always prepared for the worst. Whitaker's second message arrived that evening. Same method, arrow in the post, same handwriting, same calm, same courtesy that made your stomach turn. Next time, it will not be the shed. That night, the 3rd night of the siege, Wren did not sleep. She sat at the table in the cabin by candlelight and wrote. Not a letter, not a plea, a document. She worked with the precision of a clockmaker, pulling together every piece of evidence, every measurement, every calculation, every drawing from Josiah's notebook into a single unified report. The title page read, Astronomical Survey, Report Demonstration of Coordinate Discrepancy in Execution, Report number 186947K, Fort Kearney Military District. The report contained her 5-star measurements with exact coordinates, a hand-drawn map showing Josiah's true position in Zone Y versus the false position listed in the execution report in Zone X. A mathematical analysis of the bearing error, proving that the compass heading in the report contradicted the coordinates in the same report. A copy of Josiah's diagram of the weapons cache with the initials MW. And at the bottom, her signature, the date, and an impression made by pressing the face of the sextant into warm candle wax. She held the document up and looked at it in the candlelight. 12 pages. The work of 5 nights of stargazing, 200 years of celestial navigation science, and the last clear thinking of a 20-year-old soldier who drew flowers and died for it. Then she turned to Bridger. We need to get this to Marshall Beck. We do not need a person to go. We need the mule. The plan was simple, and it depended on three things: an animal's memory, a steep rock face, and the kindness of an old man. The east side of the mountain, the near vertical drop that Whitaker's men had not bothered to guard because no human being could navigate it. But a mule could. A mule was built for mountains, sure-footed, patient, capable of picking its way down terrain that would kill a horse. And Wren's mule had come up the mountain on the South Trail, but the last stop before the South Trail began its climb was Jasper Flint's cabin at the base of Elk Ridge. Mules remember trails. Mules remember the last place they were fed and watered. Wren wrapped the document in oilskin, sealed the seams with candle wax, and placed it in a leather pouch under the mule's saddle. She strapped it tight, checked twice. Then at 4 in the morning, in the darkness before dawn, she led the mule out the back of the clearing, past the remains of the burned grain shed, to the east edge where the rock face began its drop. She untied the lead rope, stroked the mule's nose once, whispered, "Go home." The mule stood for a moment, ears forward, nostrils testing the cold air. Then it turned east, found a fold in the rock that was not quite a path, but not quite a cliff, and began to pick its way down. Within 2 minutes, the sound of its hooves on stone faded into the pre-dawn silence. Nolan watched from the cabin door. "Who will open the saddlebag at the bottom?" Wren came back inside. Her face was calm, the calm of someone who has done the math and made her bet. "Jasper. The mule will go to Jasper's cabin. It is the last place she was fed. And Jasper will open the bag because he is a curious man and because he is a decent one." Bridger looked at her. "And if he is not," Wren met his eyes. "He touched his hat to me on my first day here. He called me Miss. He did not need to do either of those things. People who do small kindnesses without being asked are people who do large kindnesses when they are needed." It was a gamble. The entire case, the entire 4 years of hiding the entire future of 3 men and the memory of one dead soldier placed on the back of a mule walking down a mountain in the dark heading toward a 65-year-old miner who might or might not open a leather pouch. He had no reason to open. But Wren Calloway had spent her life reading the sky, and the sky had taught her one thing above all others: position is determined by what is fixed, not what is moving. Jasper Flint was a fixed point. The kind of person who stays where he is and does what is right, not because anyone is watching, but because that is where his coordinates fall. Dawn on the 4th day came gray and cold, the kind of Colorado morning where the sky looks like hammered tin and the air carries the taste of iron, and the first warning of winter. Elk Ridge was quiet in a way it had not been quiet before. Not the peaceful quiet of isolation, not the tense quiet of the siege. A different quiet. The quiet of a clock winding down, the quiet before the last gear catches. The grain shed was gone. In its place stood a rectangle of charred posts and black ash, still faintly warm, still smelling of smoke and burnt cedar. The rest of the clearing was unchanged. The cabin, the porch with its 2 steps, the wooden cross at the far end of the yard, the letters JG catching the gray morning light. 3 pairs of boots lined up outside the door, toes out, heels against the wall. An old habit from old lives. Inside the cabin, no one had slept. Wren sat at the table, her father's astronomical notebook open in front of her, the sextant beside it, Josiah's flower notebook on the other side. 3 objects in a row, 3 different kinds of evidence. 3 different languages, all saying the same thing. The mule had been gone for 6 hours. Somewhere below the mountain on the eastern slope where no trail existed and no Pinkerton rider watched, a sure-footed animal was picking its way down through old-growth pine and loose shale, heading for the last place it had been fed, carrying 12 pages of mathematics wrapped in oilskin under its saddle. 12 pages that could free a dead man and condemn a living one. Whether those pages would reach Marshall Beck depended on a 65-year-old miner named Jasper Flint, a man Wren had spoken to exactly twice. There was nothing to do now but wait. Bridger stood at the window looking south. His rifle was in his hands but not raised. He had been standing there since before dawn. Nolan sat on the floor beside the door, his back against the wall, knife across his knees, eyes closed but not sleeping. Thatcher sat in the far corner, staring at his hands. He had not spoken since the previous night. Since Wren had told him that his letter was the most beautiful sentence anyone had ever written to her, since he had understood fully and finally that the thing he had built out of deception had somehow become the truest thing in his life. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the sound came. Hoofbeats. From the south, slow, measured. The pace of a man who does not need to hurry because he has already decided what is going to happen. Bridger said he is coming up. 4 words. Enough. Nolan was on his feet before the second syllable. Thatcher stood and moved to the table, placing his body between the door and the evidence, an instinct he did not think about. Wren stayed in her chair. She did not reach for the sextant. She did not move the notebooks. She sat with her hands flat on the table palms, down the way her father used to sit when he was about to explain something important to a student who was not going to like the answer. The hoofbeats grew louder. Through the window, the riders materialized at the far end of the South Trail, emerging from the tree line like figures stepping out of a painting. 4 horses, 4 men. Colonel Marcus Whitaker in front, sitting his saddle with the rigid perfection of a man whose spine had been shaped by 30 years of military posture and would never bend again, not even in defeat. The 3 Pinkerton riders behind him had their rifles across their saddle horns. Not aimed, not threatening. Available. The distinction was deliberate, and it was the most frightening thing about them. Whitaker rode into the clearing and stopped. He dismounted with the unhurried precision of a man who has dismounted from 10,000 horses and considers the act beneath his attention. He removed his gloves deliberately, left hand first, then right. He folded them and placed them in his coat pocket with the care of a man putting away surgical instruments. He looked at the burned rectangle where the grain shed had been. A flicker crossed his face. Not guilt. Satisfaction briefly, then nothing. He walked to the cabin, climbed the 2 porch steps. Bridger and Nolan stood on either side of the door. They did not block him. They let him pass, because blocking him would have been an act of resistance, and an act of resistance would have given him a reason. Better to let him walk in. Better to let him see. Whitaker entered the cabin. He moved through the small space with the proprietary confidence of a commanding officer inspecting a barracks. His gray eyes swept the bunks, the fireplace, the provision shelf, and then settled on the table, on the notebooks, on the sextant, on the numbers. He picked up Wren's astronomical notebook, opened it. His ungloved fingers moved along the columns of measurements with a familiarity that chilled the room. Whitaker had been a scout commander. He had spent years reading coordinates, plotting positions, calculating distances across terrain maps marked with the blood of campaigns. He knew what these numbers said. His finger stopped on the final calculation. 5 measurements, 5 star positions, and the results circled twice in pencil: 39 degrees, 47 minutes north. 105 degrees, 12 minutes west. For 2 seconds, the mask cracked. It was not a large crack. If you were not watching closely, you might have missed it. But Wren was watching, and she did not miss it. The silver mustache twitched. The gray eyes widened by a fraction, then narrowed to something sharper and colder than they had been before. The jaw set. And in those 2 seconds, Wren saw everything she needed to see. She saw a man who had believed, truly believed, that his secret was safe, that the numbers he had changed in a report 4 years ago would stay changed forever, that coordinates once falsified became the truth simply because he had written them down. And now he was looking at different numbers. Real numbers. Numbers pulled from the sky by a girl with a brass instrument. Numbers that said you lied, and the sky knows. Then the mask was back. Smooth, polished, seamless, as though the crack had never existed. You measured, Whitaker said. His voice was controlled, but the control itself was the tell. Too smooth, too even. The voice of a man who is choosing every word the way of a chess player chooses every move. Wren stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. 39 degrees, 47 minutes north, 105 degrees, 12 minutes west. The true position of Private Josiah Graves on the night of March 14, 1869. She let the numbers sit in the air for a moment, let them fill the room the way smoke fills a room, reaching into every corner, impossible to ignore. 14 miles east of the coordinates in your execution report, Josiah was in the patrol zone, Colonel, Zone Y, exactly where your reconnaissance directive ordered him to go. Not in Indian territory, not deserting, not collaborating, following orders, your orders. Whitaker set the notebook down on the table, gently, the way you set down a piece of evidence that you are considering whether to destroy. Miss Calloway, his voice was almost warm, almost fatherly. That was the worst part. You are a young woman with no credentials, no military authority, and no standing in any court in this territory. This notebook is a personal diary. It proves nothing. Wren did not blink. The notebook is paper. Paper can burn, but the sky cannot burn. She took one step closer to him. Any surveyor who comes up this mountain with a sextant will take the same measurements and reach the same result. Any astronomer, any army engineer, any competent person with a knowledge of celestial navigation. The stars have been in the same position for 10,000 years, Colonel. They were there the night Josiah was arrested, and they are there tonight, and they will be there long after both of us are gone. You can burn my notebook. You can burn this cabin. But you cannot burn the ski. The silence that followed was the densest silence Wren had ever experienced. It had mass. It had gravity. It pulled everything in the room toward its center, which was the space between her and Whitaker, the space where truth and power met and discovered that they were not the same thing. Whitaker understood. She could see it in the way his hands went very still at his sides. He was not facing three soldiers with a piece of paper. He was not facing a conspiracy or a vendetta or a political maneuver. He was facing mathematics. He was facing the fixed positions of celestial bodies that had been burning in the same coordinates since before human beings existed and would continue burning in those coordinates until the sun consumed them. He could not bribe the stars. He could not issue them orders. He could not have them blindfolded and shot at dawn. He was facing the one enemy he had never prepared for, a truth that existed independently of human power. A truth that did not care who was a colonel and who was a private. A truth that simply was written in light across the darkness, measurable by anyone with the skill and the courage to look up. Whitaker turned to Bridger. When he spoke, his voice had shifted to the register he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. The register of negotiation. The register of officers making deals in quiet rooms while enlisted men bled in fields outside. The exact register he had used when he signed a reconnaissance directive and an execution order with the same hand on the same day. Sergeant Yates, let us settle this between men who understand how the world works. Burn the notebook. Surrender the copy of the reconnaissance directive. Miss Calloway goes home to her brother. No charges filed. No prosecution pursued. No consequences for anyone in this room. He paused. You have my word. The word, his word. The word of a man who had given his word to Josiah Graves that the reconnaissance mission is safe, and then given his word to the execution tribunal that Josiah was a deserter. The word of a man for whom word was simply another tool like a rifle or a pen or a forged coordinate to be used when needed and discarded when spent. Bridger looked at the notebook on the table. He looked through the window at the wooden cross in the yard, the two letters JG cut into weathered oak. He looked at Wren, and something happened behind his amber eyes that Wren would remember for the rest of her life. Not a decision being made, a decision being released. The last bolt on the last door of the last room where Bridger Yates had been hiding for 4 years, sliding open. Not with a bang, with a quiet click. The sound of a man who was finally finished being afraid. He spoke to Wren very quietly, the quietest words he had spoken since she arrived. Miss Calloway, you have done enough, more than enough. You measured 5 nights in the cold. You wrote the report. You sent it down the mountain on the back of a mule. You have done everything that could be asked of any person and more than most would dare. He paused. You can leave right now. Today. Walk out with Fritzi Gertialmo. Go back to Philadelphia. Go anywhere you want. And not one person in this cabin will blame you. Not one person will think less of you. You have earned the right to go. Nolan was silent. Wren looked at him. The man who always had something to say, the man whose mouth moved faster than his mind, the man who had grabbed Thatcher by the shirt and shoved him against a wall 24 hours ago, was standing against the cabin wall with his arms at his sides and his mouth closed. Because this was not his decision. It was hers. And Nolan Yates, for all his fire and all his rage, understood Something about choice that many calmer men never learn, that the most important thing you can do for someone you respect is to let them choose without pressure. Thatcher was looking at Wren. His brown eyes were red at the rims, his lips parted. The word stay was right there sitting on his tongue, ready to be spoken, ready to cross the small space between them and land on her and hold her here. He wanted to say it more than he had ever wanted to say anything. He closed his mouth, swallowed the word, because Thatcher Graves had already used language to manipulate Wren Calloway once. He had written a letter so beautiful that she sold her mother's ring to follow it across a continent. He had weaponized words, turned sentences into snares, made ink do the work of chains. And he would not do it again. If she stayed, it would be because she chose to stay, not because he was eloquent enough to make her. The cabin was very still. 5 people in a decision that belonged to only one of them. Wren looked at Whitaker. At the complaint letter from Gordon, her brother, her blood, who had tried to trade her to a 52-year-old merchant and then reported her kidnapped when she chose her own path. At the 3 men standing around her who were not asking, not begging, not bargaining, not even hoping, at least not out loud. She reached for the sextant. Her hand closed around the brass body slowly, deliberately. She felt the weight of it. The cool metal warmed now by the morning light through the window. The rough initials, E.C., under her thumb. Edmund Calloway, her father. The man who had put this instrument in her hands when she was 10 years old and said, "The sky will tell you where you are if you know how to ask." She lifted the sextant, held it for a moment. Then she placed it in the center of the table. Not in her hands, not in Whitaker's, not in anyone's possession. In the center, where the light fell on it equally from all sides, where it belonged to no one and spoke for everyone. My father taught me that your position does not change because someone wants it to change. It is there in the mathematics, in the stars, in the truth. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. You can rewrite reports. You can burn papers. You can send men with guns and file complaints and ride up mountains. But you cannot move a single star. She looked past Whitaker through the window to the wooden cross in the yard, 2 letters on old oak, the only monument a 20-year-old soldier who drew wildflowers would ever have. Josiah Graves was in the right position that night. She turned back to Whitaker. And I am in the right position today. Find your position, the 4th time, the final time, and the final meaning. Not a navigation lesson, not a metaphor, not a question, a declaration. Carved from the same material as the coordinates she had measured, permanent, fixed beyond dispute. I have found where I stand. No one brought me here. No one is keeping me here. I chose this ground, and I will not be moved from it, not by a colonel, not by a brother, not by a letter, not by a lie, not by anything except my own 2 feet. Whitaker looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes on her brown ones. And in that look, something passed between them that neither would have been able to name. It was not respect exactly. It was not hatred. It was the recognition that occurs between 2 people on opposite sides of a line that cannot be crossed, the recognition that the other person is real, that they are not a pawn or an obstacle or a nuisance, that they are a human being who has chosen a position and will hold it. Unfortunate, Whitaker said. He said it the 2nd time, and this time the word did not carry threat. It carried something else, something quieter and more final. The sound of a door closing. The sound of a man who has played his last card and watched it lose. He reached for the notebook on the table. His fingers were 2 inches from the leather cover when the sound came. From the south trail, from below, from the direction that all 4 of Whitaker's men had been watching for 3 days, but were no longer watching because they were all here in this cabin, at this table focused on this girl. Hoofbeats, not 4, more, many more. Moving fast, the sound of horses being ridden at speed up a mountain trail by people with authority and purpose, and the legal right to use both. Whitaker's hand froze above the notebook. Everyone in the cabin turned toward the door. The first figure to appear in the clearing was not a lawman. It was an old man on a mule. Jasper Flint, 65 years old, silver beard to his chest, back bent from decades of mining, sitting his battered mule with the stubborn competence of a man who had been riding mountain trails since before the war between the states. His hat was pushed back, His coat was covered in trail dust, and his face bore the expression of a man who has ridden 14 miles through the dark because it was the right thing to do and does not intend to discuss it further. Behind Jasper, 5 riders came up the trail in a tight column. The man in front wore a star on his chest, not a sheriff's order star, a U.S. Marshal's star, the kind that carried the weight of federal authority behind it. Deputy U.S. Marshal Orrin Beck, 45 years old, sunburned face, 2 Colts on his hips, 3 deputies riding behind him, all armed, all calm, all looking at the cabin with the professional assessment of men who do this work every day and do not find it dramatic. The mule had done its job. It had walked down the eastern slope in the dark, found the fold in the rock that was not quite a path, picked its way through pine and shale for 3 hours, and arrived at Jasper Flint's cabin at the base of Elk Ridge sometime before midnight. It had walked to the water trough, drank, stood, waited. Jasper heard it. Came outside in his long underwear and boots, a lantern in one hand and a shotgun in the other, because a mule arriving alone in the middle of the night on a mountain where 3 wanted men live is the kind of event that warrants both light and firepower. He recognized the mule, the girl's mule, the one she had ridden up the mountain on her first day, the day Jasper had touched his hat and said, "Miss." He looked at the saddle, saw the leather pouch strapped underneath, opened it, pulled out 12 pages wrapped in oilskin. He read the first page by lantern light, standing in his yard in the cold, the mule drinking beside him. He did not understand the mathematics. He did not know what a sextant measured or how celestial navigation worked, but he understood 3 phrases: wrongful execution, falsified coordinates. Colonel Whitaker. Jasper Flint was not a complicated man. He did not deliberate. He did not weigh options. He saddled his own mule, put the document inside his coat, and rode 14 miles to Ridgeline in the dark. He put the pages in Orrin Beck's hands at dawn. Beck read them. Beck was not a complicated man either, but for different reasons. He was a federal marshal. He did not care about sides. He did not care about rank. He did not care about Whitaker's reputation or his mining company connections or his military record. Beck cared about evidence, and the evidence was in his hands: 5 astronomical measurements, a coordinate analysis, a bearing discrepancy, proof, a diagram of a weapons cache drawn by a dead soldier, and the signature of a woman who had staked her safety on the sky. Beck rode for Elk Ridge within the hour. Now he stood in the clearing, dismounting with the efficient grace of a man who spends more of his life in a saddle than out of one. His deputies fanned out behind him. Calm, professional, hands near weapons, but not on them. Colonel Whitaker. Whitaker turned from the table. Slowly, his face was composed. The mask was back in place, fitting perfectly, showing nothing. The mask of a man who has survived 30 years of military politics and does not crack easily. But the mask was no longer connected to anything behind it. I hold a survey report documenting a 14-mile discrepancy between the coordinates in execution report 186947K and the verified astronomical position of the location referenced in said report. Beck's voice was flat, emotionless, the voice of a man who has discovered that justice does not require drama. It requires paperwork. I further hold a copy of a reconnaissance directive bearing your signature that directly contradicts the basis for the execution. Beck reached into his saddlebag and produced the oilskin packet, 12 pages, the work of 5 cold nights and 200 years of navigational science, and the last clear thoughts of a 20-year-old artist who drew flowers on patrol and never came home. Additionally, the report contains a diagram from the personal notebook of Private Josiah Graves depicting a weapons storage site at Fort Kearny, operating under your command, consistent with the unauthorized sale of military materiel. Beck looked at Whitaker, gray eyes meeting gray eyes. You are being detained pending federal investigation. The Pinkerton riders looked at Beck, looked at his 3 armed deputies, looked at Whitaker. Then they looked at each other and performed the calculation that hired men always perform. When the wind changes, they were being paid by the day, and no daily rate in the world was worth dying for a man who was about to be arrested. One by one, they raised their hands, slowly, palms out, the universal gesture of men who have decided that this is no longer their problem. Whitaker stood very still in the center of the cabin. The mask held. It held for 5 seconds. 10, 15. Then without cracking, without crumbling, without any visible process of deterioration, it simply fell. Not the way glass breaks, the way a leaf lets go of a branch in autumn, quietly, inevitably, because the connection that held it in place has dried through and there is nothing left to grip. What remained underneath was not the face of a monster. It was the face of a tired man. A man who had kept a secret for 4 years and maintained a fiction for 4 years and carried a dead boy's coordinates in his memory for 4 years, knowing that the numbers were wrong, knowing that he had written them wrong on purpose, knowing that a life had been traded for a lie. And now the lie was over. Not because someone had found a piece of paper, because someone had looked at the sky, because the evidence against him was not stored in a vault or a safe or a locked chest under a bunk. It was stored in the positions of stars that had been burning for 1 billion years and would go on burning for 1 billion more, indifferent to kernels and coordinates and the small sharp cruelties of men with pens and power. He looked at Wren one final time. The girl who reads stars. Silence. Unfortunate. He said it for the third time, and this time the word was empty. Hollow. A cartridge casing after the bullet has been fired and the smoke has cleared, and there is nothing left but the smell of powder and the ringing in your ears. He turned his back, extended his wrist behind him. Beck put the iron cuffs on. The click of the mechanism was small and precise, and final, a sound no bigger than a heartbeat, and it was the loudest thing that had happened on Elk Ridge in 4 years. Beck's deputies escorted the Pinkerton riders down the trail first. Then Beck himself led Whitaker's horse. Jasper Flint brought up the rear on his old mule, not because anyone asked him to, but because Jasper Flint was the kind of man who finished what he started. The hoofbeats faded, grew fainter, grew faint enough to be mistaken for the wind. Then they were gone, and Elk Ridge was quiet again. But the quiet was different now. It was not the quiet of hiding, not the quiet of fear. It was the quiet of aftermath. The quiet that settles over a place when something heavy has been lifted from it and the ground is still adjusting to the absence of the weight. 4 people stood on the porch of the cabin. Wren, Bridger, Nolan, Thatcher. Nobody spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, because nobody had practiced for this moment. 4 years of waiting, 4 years of fear, 4 years of a wooden chest under a bunk containing a piece of paper that was either salvation or destruction. And now it was over, and they did not know what to do with the space that the waiting left behind. Nolan was the first to move. He walked to the top step of the porch and sat down. Not gently. He dropped. His legs folded under him as if the tendons had been cut. He put his hands over his face. His fingers spread. His shoulders began to shake. Nolan Yates was not crying. Or if he was, it was hidden behind his palms and behind his pride and behind the careful armor that he had built out of anger and action and the constant furious refusal to sit still. But his shoulders shook. They shook the way shoulders shake when they have been carrying something for 4 years, and the weight has been suddenly, unexpectedly, mercifully removed. 4 years, every night, the same memory, a gray dawn at Fort Kearney, a blindfold in his hand, blue eyes looking at him without fear, a whispered sentence about an unfinished flower, 6 shots, a body falling, and then the silence. The worst silence in the world, the silence of a man who has participated in an injustice and cannot undo it and cannot forget it and cannot stop replaying it behind his closed eyes every time the world goes dark. Until now. Now there was something new in the silence. Not forgiveness, not absolution, something simpler. The knowledge that the truth had been spoken. That someone somewhere would read a report and see the numbers and understand that Josiah Graves had been standing in the right place on the right night following the right orders, and that the man who killed him had known it all along. It did not bring Josiah back. Nothing would bring Josiah back. But it placed him where he belonged, in the truth, in the correct coordinates, in the position he had never left. Bridger sat down beside his brother. He put his hand on Nolan's shoulder. Not a pat, not a squeeze. He placed it there and left it there, the way you place a stone on a grave. Nolan reached up and gripped Bridger's hand, held it, hard. Two brothers who had communicated through 4 years of shared silence through chopped wood and cleaned rifles and meals eaten without speaking through the language of men who have been taught that feelings are expressed through labor rather than words. They sat on the porch step and held on to each other, and the October sun came through the pines and laid long shadows across the clearing. Thatcher was not on the porch. He was standing at the far end of the yard in front of the wooden cross. His back was to the cabin. His hands were at his sides. His head was slightly bowed, and the late afternoon light caught his dark blonde hair and made it look for just a moment exactly the same shade as Josiah's had been. The same shade as the boy in the blindfold. The same shade as the artist who drew daisies. Thatcher had stood at this cross 1,000 times in 4 years. He had apologized. He had made promises. He had spoken to the oak in the dirt in the memory of a younger brother who would never be older than 20. But today he did not speak. He did not apologize. He did not promise. He simply stood, and for the first time the standing felt different. Not like a debt being paid, not like guilt being carried, like something being set down, gently, carefully, in the right place, in the correct position. Wren walked across the yard and stood beside Thatcher, side by side in front of the cross. Two letters on old oak. Two people who had come to this mountain from different directions, but who had arrived somehow at the same place. Thatcher spoke first. His voice was raw, the voice of a man who has been holding something in his chest for too long and is finally letting it out, not because he chose to, but because his body could not hold it anymore. I owe you a real apology, not the kind I gave you before. A real one, Osborne. He paused. The letter. Every word was calculated. I studied the article about your father. I identified what you cared about, what you responded to, what language would make you trust a stranger. I wrote, I am looking for someone who understands that the sky does not end at the horizon because I knew it would reach you. I knew it would sound like someone understood you. I weaponized your loneliness, Wren. I turned your isolation into a door, and I walked through it. Silence. The shadows of the pine trees were very long now. But I need to tell you something that I did not understand when I wrote it. He turned to face her. His brown eyes held hers. Every word was true. I did not know it was true when I wrote it. I thought I was constructing a fiction. I thought I was building bait. But the sentence about the sky not ending at the horizon, I meant it. The sentence about looking for a companion, I meant it. Every word I wrote as manipulation turned out to be something I actually believed. I just did not know I believed it until you showed up on a mule with a brass sextant and proved that the girl I had invented in my head was real, and better than anything I had invented. Wren looked at the cross, at the initials, at the grass growing around the base freshly cleared by her own hands days ago. You wrote, I am looking for someone who understands that the sky does not end at the horizon. She paused. That is the most beautiful sentence anyone has ever written to me. That was true on the day I read it in Philadelphia, and it is true now, regardless of why it was written. They did not touch. They did not kiss. They did not make promises or declarations. They stood beside a wooden cross in the late afternoon light, and the silence between them was not empty. It was full of things that would take time to say, and the mutual understanding that the time would be given. Inside the cabin, Bridger opened the wooden chest under his bunk, the chest that had been locked for 4 years. He lifted the lid and took out the original copy of the reconnaissance directive. Old paper, yellowed, folded in half along a crease so worn it was nearly transparent. 4 years in the dark under his bed above the floorboards. He carried it outside, walked across the yard, held it out to Wren. You keep this. You know what it is worth. Better than any of us. Wren took the paper. She looked at the signature at the bottom. Marcus Whitaker. The hand that had written the order sending Josiah out had also written the order putting him down. The same ink, the same pen, the same man. 2 documents, 2 acts, 1 signature connecting them like a thread connecting 2 beads on a string. 1 bead was a mission, the other was a murder, and the thread was a man's handwriting, recognizable, undeniable, preserved on paper, that had survived 4 years in a locked chest on a mountain because a sergeant named Bridger Yates had not been brave enough to bring it down, but had been honorable enough not to burn it. Wren folded the document with the precision she brought to everything. exact creases, square corners. She opened her father's astronomical notebook and placed the reconnaissance directive inside next to the page where Edmund Calloway had written in blue ink in the steady hand of a man who had not yet begun to forget. Find your position first. Then you will know which way to go. Two documents, side by side, a father's instruction and a soldier's last order. Two stories of men who had been failed by the systems that were supposed to protect them, the one by illness in a selfish son, the other by a corrupt commanding officer in a forged set of coordinates. Connected now in the same notebook by the hands of a 22-year-old woman who had learned to read the sky because her father put a brass instrument in her hands on a rooftop in Philadelphia and said, "Look up." Bridger watched her close the notebook, and the thought surfaced. The one he had been submerging for 4 years, pushing down every time it rose, holding it under the water of routine and silence, and the heavy numbing discipline of a man who has chosen not to feel. He had kept that evidence in a locked chest for 4 years and told himself he was protecting his family, told himself the world was not ready, told himself the system would crush them, told himself that hiding was strategy, that patience was strength, that waiting was a plan. It was not a plan. It was fear. A 34-year-old man, 6 years in the United States Army, a combat veteran who had led patrols through hostile territory and survived ambushes and stared down the barrels of rifles held by men who wanted him dead. And he had been afraid. Afraid of paperwork, afraid of courtrooms, afraid of the system, the great faceless machine that had chewed up Josiah Graves and spit out his bones and moved on to the next case without pausing. And a girl from Philadelphia, 22 years old, 5'3", ink on her fingers and a borrowed blanket around her shoulders, had done what he could not. She had taken the truth and held it up to the sky and said, "Here, look, the numbers do not lie, and neither will I." Bridger walked to the side of the cabin. He picked up his axe, climbed the ladder to the roof, and began tearing off the old cedar shingles, the ones that had been leaking since June, the ones he had patched and repatched and never properly replaced, because replacing them would have meant building for the future, and he had not believed until today that there was a future to build for. He did not say stay, he fixed the roof, because the roof is what you fix when you have decided that the building is worth keeping. 1 week later, morning, early, the kind of October morning when the fog is thin enough to see through a veil rather than a wall. The sun was not yet above the tree line, but the sky was pale blue at the edges, the blue of a day that intends to be clear. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke and the faint sweetness of the last wildflowers before the frost. Wren Calloway sat on the top step of the cabin porch. The same step, the same porch, the same view of the clearing and the trail and the pine trees marching down the mountain and the valley far below already filling with the first gold of autumn. It was the exact spot where Bridger Yates had sat cleaning his rifle on the morning she arrived. The same position, the same coordinates, but nothing else was the same. She held a tin cup of coffee, the cup with the chipped rim, her cup, the one she had claimed without asking because she liked the imperfection. "It has a flaw," she had said to no one in particular, "but it still holds." The coffee was black and bitter and perfect, and she drank it slowly while the fog burned off and the world reassembled itself one layer at a time. The sextant sat on the windowsill beside the cabin door in a square of early sun. The brass was warm. The initials EC were lit from the side, casting tiny shadows in the engraved grooves. The instrument was not in anyone's hands. It was resting. The way tools rest when their work is finished and their purpose has been fulfilled. She did not reach for it. She did not need it. She had measured. She had calculated. She had found her position. And for the first time in 22 years, Wren Calloway knew where she was without looking at the sky. She knew it the way you know the temperature of your own skin or the sound of your own heartbeat. Not through measurement, through belonging. The cabin door opened. Thatcher came out carrying a cup of coffee. He set it on the step beside Wren. The same gesture that Bridger had made on her first morning when he set a cup near her feet after she read the coordinates. The same action, but Thatcher did not walk away. He sat down. Beside her, not close enough to touch, close enough to stay. Wren looked at the cup, looked at Thatcher, did not say thank you, picked up the cup and drank. They sat together in the thin morning fog, and the silence between them was not the silence of things unsaid. It was the silence of things that did not need saying. Two people who had arrived at the same position through different routes and different lies and different kinds of courage, and who had discovered that the most honest language available to them was no language at all. Nolan came around the corner of the cabin, rifle over his shoulder, heading into the trees to hunt. He walked past the porch. As he passed, he looked at Wren. He nodded, and the corner of his mouth moved. Not much. A millimeter, maybe two. The ghost of a smile on the face of a man who had not smiled in 4 years. If you blinked, you would miss it. Wren did not blink. Bridger stood at the far end of the yard in front of the wooden cross. He had been there for several minutes, not moving, not speaking, just looking. The cross had been there for 4 years, and for 4 years it had borne only 2 letters, J.G. Josiah Graves, a name reduced to initials, a life reduced to oak. But below the initials, there was now a new line, cut into the wood with a small blade in strokes that were even and deep and precise. Not rough, not hasty. The work of someone who understood that permanence requires care. 39 degrees, 47 minutes north, 105 degrees, 12 minutes west. Innocent. The true position of Josiah Graves on the night of March 14th, 1869, carved into wood that would stand on this mountain for decades. Coordinates that could not be falsified, could not be rewritten, could not be changed by any colonel or any report or any system. Numbers pulled from the sky and fixed into the earth. A headstone made of mathematics. A memorial written in the only language that does not lie. Bridger reached out. His hand, large and scarred and rough, rested on the face of the cross. His fingers touched the letters. JG. Then the numbers. Then the word. Innocent. He held his hand there for a long time. The first time in 4 years that he had touched this cross. The first time he had believed he had the right. He did not pull his hand back. The sun cleared the tree line. The fog dissolved. The clearing filled with golden light, and the shadow of the cross stretched long and sharp across the yard, pointing east, pointing toward the slope where Amifa had walked in the dark, carrying 12 pages of truth down a mountain that had kept its secrets for 4 years. Wren Calloway came to Elk Ridge with a letter that no one wrote a brass sextant and nowhere to go back to. She stayed. Not for the letter, not for the 3 men, not for the sextant, because for the first time in her life she did not need to measure to know. She was exactly where she belonged. If Wren's story stayed with you, leave a comment and let me know. And if you want to hear what comes next, that subscribe button is right there.